All right, 4.4, solving quadratic equations by factoring. But actually, before we start solving, we have been going over 4 methods of factoring. We have gone over factoring the GCF, which you always do first whenever possible. We have covered difference of two squares, which involves two terms. So if you're given an equation that only has two terms, this is the only method you're able to solve if it meets the requirements. We have covered the AC method, which is the easy. This is with polynomials with 3 terms. All right. And the easy method is when a is equal to 1. And then there's the AC hard method, which we'll cover a little bit later. But what we're going to focus on is factor by grouping. We're going to practice this first. Factor by grouping, you must have 4 terms. So after you do your GCF, what you have left over, you have 2 terms, 3 terms, or 4 terms. You always have to check how many terms you have. Once you determine how many terms, then it will determine which method you're able to use to factor. So we're going to look at factor by grouping. All right, factor by grouping. A couple of steps you need to follow. One is you need to group them, right? In other words, we'll put parentheses around the terms. And then from each parentheses, we're going to factor out the GCF. Now, if we do that, what we have left over, what's left over in the parentheses should be the same. They must match. And if they do, that means we can take it to the last step, and then we can factor out that. So we're actually, this factor by grouping is doing the GCF 3 times. All right? Really, so factor by grouping is GCF on steroids. All right? You're doing it 3 times. All right, so for our first example, we'll keep it kind of simple. All right, so we group the first 2, group the last 2. Notice here how I put the parenthesis in front of the sign. You never put the parenthesis between the sign and the number or variable. Right? You never ever do that. Always put it in front. All right, so look in this first group. What I have in common is x. So I'm going to factor out x. So when I do that, I'm left with a minus b. Here, what I have in common is y. So I'm going to factor out y. So I'm going to say positive y. So that means I have left a minus b. Now, you notice these parentheses, these groupings are exactly the same. So that means I can take it to the last step. I can actually factor that. What I like to do is, if they're the same, take it, write it again, and come back up here and cross those out. Then in parentheses, you're going to put what's left over. I have an x and a positive y. And there, you just factor by grouping. Okay, so we're going to be doing a couple more examples. Let's look at another one. All right, so we group the first 2, group the second 2, or the last 2. Make sure you put the parenthesis between in front of the sign. Now in this group, 5 and 3, there's nothing common there. A, all right, A is common, and that's it. So I'm going to factor out an A. So if I take out the A, I'm left with 5x minus 3y. In the second group, a 2 goes into 10 and 6, so I can factor out positive 2, and it looks like there's nothing else. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, I have x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3, and then I have the y. These are the same, so I rewrite it. Come back, cross them out, and in parentheses, you put the leftovers. I have an a and a positive 2. And there you go. All right, let's try another one. Okay, last one. Group the first 2, group the last 2. Now you notice I put the parenthesis in front of the sign. So in this first group, x's are common, but you notice here, this x has the smaller exponent. So that means I got to factor out an x in that one, or x to the first power. So I get 3x plus 7b. Here I have a negative in both, so I'm going to factor out a negative. 3 and 7, nope. X and b, nope. Y is common in the small, and so therefore I can factor out a y. So when I do that, I'm left with, now I'm factoring out a negative, so that becomes a positive 3x. This becomes a positive 7b. If you notice, these are the same. So that means I can rewrite it. Come back, cross those out, and what's left over, I put in parentheses. I have an x minus y. And there you go.